We want to be able to show people what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly. While all of these other sceneries and all of these other things were going on, and how people told lies about blacks and how they depicted black people and how they depicted people from how they depicted them being subhuman and all of those types of things. People were learning that. And we have documented all of that in this museum. We've documented things like that to show that the lie had been told and people were believing it, generations after generations after generations. So part of our museum is dedicated just to showing those lies. But when you leave those lies, we want to show you the truth. The truth is that black people were so energetic in building a town where God and liberty dwells. They were so energetic about doing that they built a place called Mound Bayou. And thus Mound Bayou is a strong, powerful city that still stands. Even during the time before Montgomery, Isaiah T. Montgomery and Benjamin T. Green came to Mound Bayou, Isaiah T. Montgomery's dad, Benjamin Montgomery, ran the plantation. And he was so smart on that plantation that even after Reconstruction, they came and asked him to run for governor of the state. And a lot of people don't know that history. A lot of people don't know the Mound Bayou history. Booker T. Washington, who was a friend of the people of Mound Bayou, wrote in one of his books that Wonder Bread started here in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. The word has gotten out that actually Coca-Cola, our bottling company, that same thing, that what you drink as Coca-Cola, was started in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. You find out that a lot of things were going on that were not documented in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. So 2022 is time for us to tell this story, and that's why in July 10th, 2021, we pushed to open this museum in our very historic, right now, John F. Kennedy High School, Memorial High School band room. That our school, we lost our high school, but we still want to make something of our high school, and the band room they were able to give it to us where we can open the museum. And there's where we have now a display. We ran into just a few weeks ago, a real good problem. And that problem is now we have the set, parts of the set, major parts of the set you can see behind me from Women of the Movement. And if you would look, you would see even the gin fan that they tied around supposedly from that movie set. They sent that to us. You would also see where over here where the dress that Mamie Till wore, supposedly the actress wore in that movie. We have other parts of the set. I'm sitting here close to, and since I have it on my phone, I'm sitting here close to that checker board where they were playing, where the guys were sitting and playing checkers right there at Bryan Grocery. So we have all of those pieces, and now we are actually pushing to have a constructive way to display all of those pieces in the museum. But I want you to enjoy what we have to show you today as we get into this presentation of the Mound Bayou Museum. It is very historic. You'll never forget it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Told me a story of my granddad going to the local tractor shop. And my granddad goes there. He was the owner of the one of the cotton gins here in Mound Bayou. But he goes to the local tractor shop there in Cleveland, Mississippi, stands in the back, wait for his turn to go to the counter. And they had a new boy in the back behind the counter working there, so he didn't know most of the customers, but yet he was young and he was working back there with them. There were other people at the counter, my granddad standing back there with his hat on, waiting for his turn to come up. And all of a sudden, the little young boy hollered to the back and saw my granddad standing back there with his hat on. He said, "Hey, take your hat off." So my granddad, my mom said, just stood there with the part in his hand, was standing there waiting for his time. And certainly he probably was thinking, I know they're not talking to me. And he says again, he said, "Did you hear what I said? Take your hat off." Say by that time, my granddad said they grabbed the little young guy. One of the persons took to him and pulled him up against the wall and said, "Don't talk to him like that. That's not, he's from Mound Bayou." And that was the thought that they had of the people in Mound Bayou. Was no more racism, basically because they saw people in Mound Bayou as green. They saw them as money people that succeeded. And they had a great respect. People in Mound Bayou mentored some of the other people. So you can understand that the relationship, even though there was a white-black relationship, black don't touch white, white don't touch black, Mound Bayou was different.
Okay, so right now we're in the Mound Bayou Museum, and we're here to tell the story of Mound Bayou, Mississippi, because we feel it's very, very important that people know, and not just for people from Mound Bayou, but nationally, they should know the story of Mound Bayou. Now, there are a couple of parts in what we have in this museum. When we do a tour, we show the differences in how people came up in this country. On the other side, we have a collection that we showcase in this museum by Dr. Alvin Simpson. Dr. Simpson was a professor at Alcorn. He's retired now in Atlanta, but he had been collecting African American artifacts all his life. And once he realized that there was going to be a museum here in Mound Bayou, and it being an all African American town and the history of Mound Bayou, he found that would be the perfect place to put his collection. And so we have that, and he was offered a substantial sum of money to take it somewhere else, but he preferred to bring it here because this should be the place that it should be. On the other side, you see a lot of disparity in how blacks came up in this country. And you'll see a lot of denigrating, a lot of negative images on the other side over there. A lot of postcards with the N-word, a lot of black babies, a lot of negative stereotypes all through that part of the museum. If you tour this museum, at the same time you see those images there. When we bring you to the other side, you see the progress and the prosperity that blacks were having here in Mound Bayou.
Mound Bayou was founded by interested men and women that were former slaves on the plantation of Davis Bend. Davis Bend was owned by the Confederate president's brother, Joseph Davis. And because of that, because of some of the things that they did differently on those plantations, one was utilizing an Owenism, they call this type of utopian type society, which allowed one of them for the people on the plantation to educate themselves. And so they didn't stop them from being educated. And because of that, Montgomery, one of the founders, ended up being educated through the law library of Joseph Davis. And they in turn began to educate other people within the camp. So these people were highly educated, highly functional in commerce, highly functional in industrialism, commercialism, and they ran the plantation in a very pristine manner. And so much so that they had the highest grade of cotton there than anywhere else. Agriculturally, just all around, very highly educated, because they didn't go from like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. They went from, I'm educating you, and then you pass this on to your children and your other children and your grandchildren and all of that. And so it was a passing on of education, and not just going through and I've made it. Like, I got a degree, I'm not going to be educated anymore, but education became a life. And those people that were educated there, friends, when they finally had to leave and go and make their own country, their own city, and they call it their country, they came to this place, 100 miles north of Vicksburg. It was heavy swamp areas, and that's where they bought this land from, was the train organization at that time. The train organization really had a problem selling it to other people. But they thought maybe we can offer this to the blacks, and maybe because they came from Africa and they can deal with malaria and mosquitoes better than anybody else, we'll sell it to them. They did. But these people that came, the Montgomerys and the Davises and the Greens, all of the rest of them that came, they drained the swamp. And this was the real swamp draining. They actually drained the swamp land, and they strategically drew up how to do it. And within so many years, Mound Bayou became a thriving, powerful city. There was a time, even while they was draining that swamp, even while they were building Mound Bayou, that Montgomery would make a statement to them that why are you having a problem? Because many of them did. Some of them could not see what he saw, the vision. And he would say, didn't you do this on behalf of your master? Didn't you do this because your master told you to do it? Can you not do it for yourself and your children that comes behind you? And as he told them that, and he would tell them, as Moses did when he was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt into the promised land. There's a scripture where he says, now stand still and steady yourself and look forward and go on. Go on. And this is one of the things that Montgomery had to do to the people of Mound Bayou, and they did. But now this happened in 1887, but by 1907, the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, by the invitation of now Isaiah T. Montgomery, the founder, but yet he was known across the land as a highly and well-respected person. These guys were so highly educated that they invited the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, who came. And I used to ask the question, what was the name of the train that Roosevelt rode? And my answer is, he rode Choo Choo 1. So he brought Choo Choo 1 to Mound Bayou. And he stood on the back of the train, and he gave this message. And he was emotional, highly emotional about it. He would make statements like, And at that time, they would look at blacks and their color and say they are 100% black. Or if their color, the tone moved back, they say they're 80% black, or they 50% black based on their color. And so his statement was that these are 100% black, and look at what they did. And he called Mound Bayou, coined the phrase jewel of the Delta, which we use right now. Mound Bayou is the jewel of the Delta. And Theodore Roosevelt gave us that. And so when he came and coined Mound Bayou, the jewel of the Delta, he actually gave us a spurt here in Mound Bayou to become that jewel, to really show that jewel. And the reason that he did that, when he looked up and down, it was written that when he looked up and down that road and he saw white picket fences around huge homes, which was built first and second and some on the third floor homes. And they were magnificent, and the money that was spent in Mound Bayou was high, because there were more millionaires per capita in Mound Bayou than any other city in Mississippi, because cotton had done this. So he would tell that story, and he would look at Mound Bayou and say, this is the jewel of the Delta. And years later, he would go down, such as speaking at the YMCA in D.C. and other places, and he would say, you all need to take note of the people in Mound Bayou and what they did. Some of the people from Black Wall Street that started the things at Black Wall Street in Tulsa came through Mound Bayou. There's parts of history that some of the key people at Black Wall Street were married and mentored by Isaiah T. Montgomery. We had the starting of the Negro Business League through the people in Mound Bayou. Booker T. Washington utilized at the National Convention for the National Negro Business League, the keynote speaker, 12 times Isaiah T. Montgomery was the keynote speaker. 12 different years, Isaiah T. Montgomery. So that says a whole lot about our founder. Our founder must have been a well-spoken person to be able to be utilized 12 times to be a keynote speaker at the Negro Business League. Mound Bayou was different because people saw green. People saw the 6 cotton gins that Mound Bayou had, because the cotton here in Mound Bayou was the most premium cotton in the whole world. As a matter of fact, at one time, Mound Bayou set the price of cotton. The Mound Bayou cotton set the price on cotton because it was the most premium cotton. There are banners. These banners said Bolivar County leads the world in cotton production. Of course, when they make the banners, they're not going to say Mound Bayou, but people will come from all over, everywhere, just to get the Mound Bayou seal on their cotton. The whole peripheral, Cleveland, Shelby, everywhere else, the farmers will come. I need my cotton ginned in Mound Bayou so that cotton can get the stamp Mound Bayou. We had all types of stores. Up to 60 businesses were recorded at one time in Mound Bayou, where people would come from all of the plantations from all around on the weekend just to come to Mound Bayou, because it was a place where people could live and live freely. People in Mound Bayou didn't have to leave Mound Bayou. It was that haven that, you could go within just the circumference of the city and get all of the things that you needed in the city right here. Even the bottling company in Mound Bayou. That bottling company is not down in history that it started Coca-Cola, but that's what is being said by the people here in Mound Bayou. Of course, people wouldn't give blacks the credit for starting something like Coca-Cola. But this was said all of my life, that Coca-Cola got started in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. And of course, you'll see these bottles that's here at this museum, that these bottles come from Mound Bayou Bottling Company. And the bottling company was later sold to somewhere else, but we had our own bottling company here in Mound Bayou. And Booker T. Washington and the founder of Mound Bayou would go other places and talk about it. In a speech in 1912, Mr. Montgomery began to mention this as well in his speech about the bottling company in Mound Bayou. Now, Booker T. Washington talks about, and some of the older people that even I ran into as a child, that talked about Mound Bayou used to smell so good. When you come to Mound Bayou, it smells so good because there was a bread company here. And the name of it was Wonder Bread. It started in Mound Bayou. The book that Booker T. Washington wrote, The Town Owned by Negroes, and he talks about Mound Bayou extensively. He talks about Wonder Bread getting started in Mound Bayou, Mississippi. These are important facts, but they were disregarded by the regular media, disregarded by historians, because a lot of it came from Mound Bayou. Irregardless of all of that, Mound Bayou still has that history, and that history has to be exposed. Such as the oil mill, which was the greatest opening and the greatest accomplishment at that time for African Americans in this country, when Booker T. Washington came and was the keynote speaker at the opening of that Mound Bayou oil mill. And they worked so hard against the people in Mound Bayou to stop the success of the oil mill. So much so that finally, even through the efforts of the people of Mound Bayou to put white people out front, some of their white friends out front, to keep them from coming against that, they bought that and they decided we still are going to stop utilizing the people in Mound Bayou. So they couldn't sail outside of Mound Bayou. And so they white capped, what we call white cap. They stopped the organization from operating. This is our powerful history. Booker T. Washington mentored somebody named Charles Banks, who Banks, when he came, opened a bank. And Mound Bayou then had a strong financial piece that kept Mound Bayou rolling. Charles Banks was a genius in finances, and they recognized that and knew it. They closed our bank. They closed our bank in Mound Bayou. And the reason that Mississippi, who was not regulated by the federal at that time, closed our bank, because there was some type of outside agitators that had a problem. And they wrote the state of Mississippi, and they said, now, listen, let's make sense of this. How can you allow a person or people that hold assets in the bank to record 100% asset for their holdings, and they're only 80% people? They're not 100% people. If they're not 100% people, why can they record 100% of asset? And so I guess the state of Mississippi say, well, you got a point, because we've been saying that they're not 100% people. So they closed the bank because of the devastation that was coming from racism. There were certain rules and certain laws and unspoken rules, but yet spoken. Certain things that you do, certain things that you don't do. And people knew how to live by those laws.
There's several variations of the story about Emmett Till, but when he came, of course, being a young man from Chicago, he didn't have any inhibitions about just being a kid. And so some things were taken the wrong way when he went to Money, Mississippi, and which was a very, very, and still is, a very racist area. There's some things that's going on there right now that I can tell you that are extremely racist that people are experiencing right now in that area. and it's not that far from here, so there's really some pockets of areas that are very racist. So I can understand that when he went there as a kid from Chicago and not being inhibited at all, that once he got there, just one wrong move or one move that was interpreted wrong could have put him in danger. And so they took him out of his bed in the middle of the night and beat him and slashed him and then beat him some more. And it shows in the movie they shot him. And so he was thrown in the Tallahatchie River, and they a few days later they fished him out because he was tied down with a 200-pound gin fan, and but somehow his legs, of course, surfaced, and they found that body. They pulled him out, and then he had when they saw the body. It was really tough identifying it because because of the time being in the river, and also the fact that the way they beat him, it was just there was all types of contusions and things around his body. But the one thing that he did have in his possession and on his finger was his father's ring, and they were able to use that as another way of identifying him because he had that ring on. Mound Bayou was known throughout the North Mississippi area as being a haven for blacks. We had sort of like an underground railroad, since we had a railroad that came through here. It was built on a rail line. People knew in Mississippi, black people at least knew in Mississippi, if you were ever in trouble anywhere else in the state, that if you made it to Mound Bayou, you could make it to safety. And a lot of times there are many stories about people who came from different places in Mississippi and came here and got here, and they got on the train and went somewhere else just to get safe from whatever was going on. After that happened with Emmett, of course, his mother came down. She wanted to come to the trial, and they had to have a place to stay. So not only did Mamie Till stay here, but the black press and the black public officials all stayed in Mound Bayou because in the Mississippi Delta, there was nowhere else where a black person at that time could have safe accommodations. When that trial happened, it was a natural place, especially because T.R.M. Howard was already involved in the civil rights movement. He was a fiery orator, and he would go around the country not only mentoring civil rights leaders here, but he was also mentoring civil rights leaders in other states and other places, and he was a nationally known figure.
And he would end up inviting Mamie Till Mosley to come to stay in Mound Bayou, and he hid her out in his home. He had a large home, my dad said, and he talked about his home. He talked about how he would hide her there. And they talk about the security that he had. He had people that were security, but yet when he drove his car, he would have guns in his car in places that nobody else could ever find. And of course, he was stopped many times when he would cover for Mamie Till, would drive her from here to the court, or from here for investigation.
There was a caravan of armed guards taking her to and from the courthouse. And matter of fact, my dad tells me they would lay her down in the back seat, put a cover over her, and take her back and forth because they had snipers out ready for them going back and forth to the courthouse.
Dr. T.R.M. Howard, I would say, instigated a lot of the things that went national about the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mosley investigations of that case. And so Dr. Howard was like in the background making things happen. He made calls, he knew people, and no wonder Miss Mamie was able to make some telephone calls, because if you call Dr. Howard, he knew who that knew somebody else that knew who would be able to tell somebody else to tell them to deal with this. And those are the types of things that you needed during that time. And that's the reason why Emmett Till's body didn't go in the ground in Mississippi, because if it had gone in the ground in Mississippi, we would not have had the civil rights movement. And it was because they took that body the way it was and sent it to Chicago, Illinois, where she could expose that body to the world. That's the reason that we had civil rights. If there was not a civil rights movement, then there would not have been a pause in that, and then we could send it all the way back to contribute that to the work that Dr. T.R.M. Howard did during the time of the Emmett Till trials. Mamie Till, not only, she did not come, when she came to Mound Bayou, she did not come to a strange place. There are family members that are still here that are related to Mamie Till, even though she was hiding out at T.R.M. Howard's house. She made her way through the community. She was able to talk to her relatives. She was able to later on come back and revisit Mound Bayou and go by different people's homes and talk to different people about what actually happened. You know, what's reported in newspapers and what actually happens sometimes can be different. And she talked about how important it was for the whole world to see what they did in Mississippi. She released her son's death to be a seed planted for the rights of African Americans across this country. She released that. And she said how she thought her son had to die so that these things would happen. She changed her life to be able to come the rest of her life and to just talk about the rights of African Americans.
We were offered a collection from that Mamie Till Women of the Movement story. When they separated the sets, they gave the DeSable Museum and the Mamie Till house that they're going to refurbish. The set that was used for Mississippi, we have here. Now, we have that ring here in that museum that they use in the film. We have the bed that Emmett was taken out of in the movie. And so most of those things we are putting together for another part of the tour. You know, you have Mound Bayou, you have the other side, and then you'll have the Emmett Till story, the Women of the Movement story here at this museum in Mound Bayou.
The Knights and Daughters of Tabor fraternity put together their nickels and dimes across the country in this secret fraternity, and they built for the first time where blacks could walk through the front door of a hospital, the Taborian Hospital in Mound Bayou. And thus you have Dr. T.R.M. Howard coming into Mound Bayou, and Dr. T.R.M. Howard coming to be not only the chief surgeon, but the medical director for Taborian Hospital. Dr. T.R.M. Howard would go on and began to build up Mound Bayou. He was an entrepreneur. Across the street, he would put a zoo. Then he would also build a similar place to Taborian Hospital called the Friendship Clinic. Before then, he had the Green Parrot Inn, which was a restaurant, and people would enjoy the Green Parrot Inn. But he would also build this big Olympic-sized swimming pool across the street. And young people all over would come and jump off of the high diving board, the low diving board, and just have a good time right here in the Mississippi Delta in the 1950s. Would you believe? Black people were able to not be discriminated at an Olympic-sized public swimming pool, the only place that you'll find it in Mississippi. And would you believe that Dr. T.R.M. Howard still had time to be a doctor? He was such a wonderful doctor that even the whites would have him to come and see personally their family members. It was all known that, of course, at night that he would go and visit some of the other people, but yet they wouldn't, I guess, come to Mount Bayou, nor, but they paid him to come to be doctors for their family members as well. He was a very jazzy man. He was a man of, my father said, because my dad would come here in 1953 and begin to work for him himself, because he had hired Mega Evers, and Mega Evers would go out and finally go to work with the NAACP, which Dr. Howard was working with. Of course, he was also had become the president of the Mississippi chapter of the Negro Business League as well. He also was doing businesses. He was also bringing businesses to Mount Bayou. And my father, Herman Johnson, came and worked for them as well. And so then I'm getting now the story of Herman Johnson talking about Dr. T.R.M. Howard. He says to me that Dr. Howard built everything large. He did everything large. He grew everything large. Dad said that all of his watermelons was large. He said he had corn that was larger than everybody else's corn. Everything was large what he did, and when he did it large.
The way I got to Mount Bayou is that my aunt lived here, and I heard of an all African-American city. That we were, like people were jumping off the diving board like white people were and all, and no other place in the southern part of the states that I lived in, any of the southern states. And I was saying, I want to go to the place. So I came here to visit Mount Bayou, and that's how I got stuck. So that's the way I got to Mount Bayou. And then I went to school at Southern University of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my director of my department head, when I finished school in business, she asked me where was I going. I told her New York and Chicago. And she said, well, I know you're going back to you got a wife in Mount Bayou. So I came to Mount Bayou, and she told me to see Dr. Howard. I saw Dr. Howard and he said, I got a job for you. And the job that he had for me right then was the Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company that Medgar Evers had just left, and that was the position that he had before he was sent to the state by Dr. Howard as the field director for the NAACP. So that was the position that I took, and I worked with him, and matter of fact, in the position that I had, I also served pretty much as secretary for many of his organizations, because he had several organizations that he had, and he had board meetings in the office of the Magnolia Mutual Life Insurance Company. So I was involved with him in a lot of his meetings. And I have copies of some of his handwritten notes that he took, speeches that he made around. And interesting things about him, he wrote his speeches out the same time he was conducting his other board meetings, all the same time, and never missing a beat. And I have pages of that. But Dr. Howard, let me just say, he was my boss, but it was a pleasure working with him. He was an awesome person that everything he touched grew big. Now there are a lot of stories about how he left here, and even in the book of the Black Maverick, they talk about the different ways that people say he left here, and they say he left in the coffin and all that kind of thing. But at least the Ku Klux Klan and it got so tight on him that they had put the word out that they were going to kill him, and he knew that nothing would be done to any white person that killed a black person. So he eventually moved on out and started a business in Chicago. The other things I think a lot of people don't know is that J. Edgar Hoover and Dr. Howard had they had a thing. They were always on each other because even the killing here for Emmett Till, the FBI didn't do what they were supposed to have done, and Dr. Howard talked about it, and J. Edgar Hoover was trying to do whatever he could to tear him down. The interesting thing is that, and I saw this in an article in the newspaper, J. Edgar Hoover praised him for what he had done in Mississippi, Dr. Howard. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought that was something that people should know, because nobody talks about that too much. The museum that we started as African Americans in this Mount Bayou, that so much history in all the museums around the country, so many of them have not touched upon all the catastrophes that black people have gone through. There are so many things that we want to expand this museum. For example, the black church. There is so much that the black church has done for black people's advancement that is still not being told, from the Underground Railroad to the civil rights struggle to where we are, even the killing and the bombing of the churches. All that time, the church has been involved in the safe haven to get us to where we are. And all those things I'm saying that we need to talk about, that people need to know about, that we don't have in all the other museums. For example, the cotton gin. All of the inventions that black people had needed to use in order to better their condition, and somebody else getting the name for it. Eli Whitney didn't. We know that he didn't invent it. The cotton gin was invented by black people, but they gave him the credit for doing it because he was white. But there were so many things that we invented that a lot of people don't know about. And even if you know about it, we didn't get credit for. All these things we just need for us to know what we have done in order to get where we are, that we didn't get credit for. And I just think the more it's talked about, the better we understand and appreciate ourselves, because the white people have tried to keep us from appreciating ourselves. And they try to make us want to look white like them. Until, a few years ago when somebody said, black is beautiful. People didn't start appreciating themselves until then. What happened? And we feel that they intend to do basically the same thing they did to Black Wall Street. And probably the reason we don't hear about it too much because they didn't do it. But anyway, somehow we found out about it. When the horses came in, I understand they turned the lights off in the city. And they were going to drive in and do whatever they want to do to it. But we had found out about it. And turned the lights on and had the Gatling gun over in one of those houses and people on top of houses all around. They turned the lights off and started shooting. And the people on the horses, the Klan, everybody, they turned around and went back, and then they came back. So that's why we're still here. Otherwise, we don't know what they would have done. Another thing a lot of people may or may not know, but it is in the history book, that Mount Bayou for many years had the best grade of cotton in the world, not just in Mississippi, in the world. Now, there's a story behind that people don't talk about too much. The reason they were able to have that best grade of cotton is because the way the founders of Mount Bayou got here and who they were when they got here. Black people have always been smart. Even the slaves that came over, they were smart. And that's why white people didn't want them to communicate with each other, because they didn't want them to know what they knew. They didn't want them to share their information with others and teach them. When the black people at Davis Bend and the slaves on Davis Bend, they were not only able to slip and read, but Davis allowed them, and not only allowed them, but provided books for them to read and write. And they got so smart until they were able to run the stores, negotiate the land, buy the cotton, sell the cotton, and buy everything. They were able to have the books. So when the Union Army came in and started destroying all the white folk land, the land had been turned over to the black folk. So they owned the property for a while. And then they, later on, they came back and took it all back. But by that time, the black people knew how to do things. And they founded Mount Bayou. And they survived and did a whole lot of things that they were doing other places. And that's why they were able to have even the white folk who around were slipping that cotton into Mount Bayou to get the Mount Bayou tag on it, because it's the best grade of cotton in the world. So those are the kind of things that not only people don't know, but if they do know, they try to keep it quiet. There was so much history. Well, I don't know if it's in the point in talking about that, but maybe it is the point of talking about that, because the more we talk about it, the more people understand how our history has been tried to keep out of the real history books that's being taught into the schools. For example, Dad came here, but when he came to go over here and picked up a history book to see how much about Mount Bayou, and he couldn't find it, he went to the index and it said Mount Bayou, and it had just a sentence in there about Mount Bayou. Nothing about Mount Bayou. They didn't even have in the history book about the history of anything about how Mount Bayou was founded and all of that. So that's why I try to say to everybody, if you want to know the history of yourself, you have to find it somewhere else. You won't find it in the history books that's being taught in the schools. Then that's the way to find the history of black people, is that you have to go and search for it from history books that have been written by black people or some other person that has the interest of us in heart. And there are so many books out, and we have some here that share the introduction to the struggles that we've gone through in order to get where we are. Now, and I'm not just saying the struggles that we have gone through. Most of the time, all our lives that we've been here, for the most part, they've been against Mount Bayou. But see, at the struggle, we had a saying that we had to do 10 or 15 times more in order to get what we got than other towns in the county. I've had quite a bit. I could have a 300-page book if somebody wanted to write it. So I know that we don't have time to do that. I just think about all the things that we've tried to do here in Mount Bayou and the struggle we've had to get to where we are in Mount Bayou after the initial number of years. For about 60-some years, they've done everything they could to prevent. But the struggle that the white people are doing right now is trying to stop us from voting. And we know that's wrong. But they want to try to own, and let me just say what I've said to some of the people around. It's the same thing as many years when the black truck driver, how they did him in California, came And he said, can't we all just get along? This country would be a whole lot better place if we all worked together.
Thank you all for joining us. I hope that you all enjoyed this wonderful presentation given to you by AARP Mississippi. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. We surely do appreciate you. And you all have a wonderful night.